Hello and welcome back to the Film Posers YouTube channel. Today we are joined by a very special guest, and Gabriela Burgos, my co-host, is going to be leading us in this conversation, and she's going to introduce our very special guest.
Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by a very special guest. He is an LA-based Puerto Rican composer whose work has been featured in hit TV shows like Riverdale, The Flash, and Blind Spot, as well as a dozen feature films like The Time Capsule. Known for his unique blend of acoustic and Latino instruments with modern experimental electronics, his work can currently be heard in the film R#J, a modern adaptation of Romeo and Juliet told through the lens of social media with Black and Latinx youth at its core. Directed by Kerry Williams, the film had its world premiere at Sundance on January 30th, 2021, and it is currently a festival favorite at South by Southwest. Let's give it up for René G. Boscio. Welcome.
Hi, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you for being here. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that? Because I think it was a very good introduction.
Yeah, I think it was very encompassing. So, yeah, good job.
Okay, so René, we're just going to jump into the questions then.
Okay.
So R#J is a very unique film in terms of the format that it is told. What first drew you to this project?
So I became involved because of Kerry Williams, the director. He and I have been friends for about 4 years or so now. We met at a Film Independence Directors Close-Up event and, had kind of always stayed in touch and been looking for a project to work on together. He had a short film called Emergency, which was part of Project Involved from Film Independent. I think it was like 2018. And he wasn't going to have a score for that, but I let him use like a track from my catalog just as like source music. And that ended up getting into Sundance. And so coincidentally, that same year, Veronica Ortiz Calderon, who's a Puerto Rican filmmaker, she did the short documentary Candlelight, and it screened at a separate event from the festival, but during and at the festival. And so I ended up flying out there to kind of meet her and meet the executive producers. And since Kerry was presenting Emergency at that festival, I ended up crashing at his place for the night. And so that was kind of fun to just bond together to that extent. But yeah, so then when he got Romeo and Juliet, when they got into post-production, he called me up and he was like, hey, I have this movie. Would love, for us to be able to work together finally properly. And so just because it was him, I was immediately like, yes, let's do it, even before having seen it or anything. But then he sent me the cut that they were working on. And that was obviously like very mind blowing. And, he mentioned like, oh, it's a new take on Romeo and Juliet, which was already kind of like exciting, just from the IP perspective of like, oh, well, this is a huge IP, a story that everybody knows. So it'll be interesting to see how I can tackle it, in terms from a music standpoint. It was a challenge in terms of like the hype that just the pressure you put on yourself just from it being an IP. But then, he kind of explained to me before showing it to me like, oh, so it's a screen life format. They, we do everything on like computers or screens or mobile phones. And I wasn't quite understanding what he meant by it. And he was like, oh, check out this movie called Searching from the same production team that they did in 2018. And so once I watched Searching, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So it's like, yes, I want in on it 100%. And so then, he sent me the cut and then we just started working from there. But that was kind of how I got involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you, considering, as you mentioned, it seems very out there and it was a very unique way to approach the story. When process varies when creating, and considering how different this was there anything new that you found yourself doing during your process that surprised you or that you hadn't done before?
No, I mean not so much from the music creation standpoint. I will say at first, when you hear about how it unfolds and like thinking that like, oh, so it's always going to be on a screen, you're going to be reading a lot, so like my immediate thought was like, this is going to be very score heavy, just because your instinct is like, oh well, then the music's going to have to carry it. But so Carrie always knows, he's very good with music and always has like his ideas of what he wants. And for this particular story, because of the the story unfolds as like Gen Zers, so to speak, like, Romeo and Juliet and everyone's younger. So he had this kind of like Spotify playlist mentality to it that played a huge role in the film. So a lot of the musical background is taken up by Spotify, by Spotify playlists and songs that the characters actually press play on during the movie. So that kind of like, took a huge load, so to speak, off of my shoulders from the score perspective, and then allowed the score to have much more impact in the places where it did come in, to support, the tension and the drama between the families, of the Romeo and Juliet story that we all know, in a much more impactful way than if the score had been also in charge of everything else in the movie.
Yes, one of the highlights of the film for Josie and I, we talked about this when we met at Sundance, was when they played Noviembre Sin Ti.
Yeah.
That was such a highlight of this film, and honestly,
Yeah.
it was a very brilliant way of doing it with the Spotify playlist aspect of it. It fit the
Yeah, and I think it was very smart of Carrie and very careful of him, like, having the the right approach to, because the Capulets are a Latinx family, in the way the story is posed. The Montagues are a Black family, and then the Capulets are a Latinx family. And, the Capulet party takes place over a day of the death celebration, right?
Dia
Dia
de
de los
Muertos, yeah.
Muertos. Yeah. Um, and it made so much sense that the music of that party would all be Latinx, kind of like heavy. So yeah, so they had that Drake song, and they had a couple of other like more like punky kind of stuff that I like really loved. And so when I watched the first cut, all of that was already there, because like that Carrie already had kind of like in mind all those things. So it was very cool to, have the score find a way to blend into that, same with like the Latinx pop culture in terms of music, same with like the Black and like the old hip hop and the new hip hop and that kind of stuff that he was doing throughout the film. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to work on in general.
So actually jumping off that, this is perfect then. Is there anything specific you drew inspiration from that didn't make the cut as well, considering many songs form part of the characters? Were there any songs that the actors recommended?
No, I mean, I don't think the actors played any part in the song suggestions, or like, it was funny because the actors, after they watched the cut after the Sundance premiere, they were like, "Wow, that came out like way different than what we expected," because a lot of the story unfolds without them really, because it's all motion graphics and the text messages and all that stuff that like the editor and the visual effects artist and Carrie controlled after they had filmed the scenes where we actually see the actors. But in terms of influences, Carrie and I have always been very aligned in terms of like tastes, musical tastes, but when it comes to scores specifically. So he kind of had an idea. He's a big fan of like electronic ambient and drone music. He uses it a lot to write and that kind of stuff. So he knew, based on the stuff that I tend to be posting on my social media with all my electronic equipment and all that stuff, he knew that I'm already familiar with that kind of approach. So fortunately, I didn't have to stretch too far from what I normally do in music. And the thing that I have been doing lately, which I took advantage of in this film because of the Latinx thing with it was that I started incorporating several Latinx instruments, like Latino instruments, into the score, and doing it in a way that is not noticeable. That it's not too obvious that, like, oh, here's a Venezuelan cuatro or here's a Mexican vihuela. They're just kind of like weaved into the score, and they make part of like the pulses or the tension or the rhythm that the scenes start to get. And again, my attempt is to, what I'm after is bringing these instruments that are made traditionally for folkloric music or that kind of thing, and then just bringing them into contemporary film scores where they are simply another instrument in the score, another color for the palette, and not meant to stand out or make a statement, just kind of make them a common thing, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. It was very interesting, the combination between the songs and the score in this film. Again, it all fit together so well and goes with the theme of, social media and all of the different apps that we see on the film. We even see Letterboxd on this film. And TikTok, I don't know TikTok. I don't use TikTok. So Romeo making TikToks to me was just, what? But
yeah. I mean, it's a good way to teach this story to a newer generation, because I remember yesterday in the film's page in South by Southwest, people were asking, when can I show this to my students?
Oh, nice. Yeah, and I think that's the main point, that we're after. It's like taking this story, that generation after generation is told, and obviously it's usually just taught in its literature form in schools, but I think this could be a very interesting way to make this younger generation more interested in the story and see it from a more relatable point of view of, like, these struggles that have been in text for centuries. What would they look like today, by people who actually look like us and use the apps we use and have the struggles we have, and that kind of stuff. So hopefully it makes its way out soon, so that it can have the impact we're hoping for it to have.
Yeah, definitely. I think my favorite part of it is also how it kept the original Shakespearean language, and then they just text like in normal English, but when they speak, it's Shakespeare. I love that. But again, I'm a Shakespeare nerd. I love Shakespeare, so that to me I love.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people, it's interesting to see what people like and what people don't like, and it's funny how some things some people love and the same thing other people just can't deal with, and that's one of the things that I've read a lot of like conflicting reviews from some people who love and embrace that jumping between the Shakespearean language in the spoken performances and then the contemporary vernacular in the written performances. And someone on a review brought a good point that, I mean, some people already find it taxing to have to be so visually engaged the whole time, because a lot of people are used to just putting a movie and then not even looking at it, and just kind of like listening to it and looking every now and then. But this movie, you have to be eyes glued to the screen the whole time, or you're going to miss out a lot. And imagine how much more taxing it would be if everything that you're having to read was also in Shakespearean language, that you're then having to like, because it's one thing to hear it and you can kind of process it quicker. But if you're having to read it also, I can imagine that would have gotten a lot more tiresome. I was going to say, I love, like, I was watching it yesterday when it came up on South by again. And I love, like, Julia just being like, hey, sexy, don't go anywhere. I'll call you right back. And it's like, that's just how we talk. It's like, it's so,
Yeah, and something you said reminded me of the fact that, again, this is a story about Black culture and Latino culture, and then a lot of what makes that up is switching, and that's what you see in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I'm excited for people to see it and see like these kind of reactions of like, who embraces what and who is kind of like, no, it should have been this way. And I just think that stirs up debate and stirs up interest, because then people are like, I wonder how I'll feel. Let me check it out, so.
Yeah, that's kind of like how when I saw it at the Sundance lineup, I looked at it, Romeo and Juliet through social media, and I just went, this could work. I see it. I see the possibilities in this film, and that's why I decided to watch it. And I personally loved it. It was one of the highlights of Sundance for me, and obviously I watched it again at South by Southwest because, of course. Okay.
Yeah.
So, is there a specific piece that you're most proud of composing, being for this film or any of your other projects?
I mean, it's really hard to pick a single piece of music. I can tell you for this score, I really like the piece that comes right after Romeo and Juliet kind of like make their love public, so to speak. And then everything just kind of starts blowing up, with with everyone going after them, from like what are you thinking and all that stuff. And then, I think eventually, as if anybody is familiar with the Romeo and Juliet story, Mercutio dies. He gets, he fights with Tybalt and that whole thing. And so that sequence that comes after that too, when people actually start dying and then they start blaming Romeo and Juliet for this whole thing. That is also one of my favorite pieces, in the movie in general, and score wise, what it does and how it heightens the tension and with the edits and all that stuff. I think the editor Lamb also did a fantastic job with the pacing of the movie and like intercutting all these like news articles and like Facebook comment sections blowing up and messages like coming in and being just very overwhelming to how it is nowadays, when you're like trying to keep up with stuff that's happening on the news, or if there's any kind of drama within your circle, you immediately you feel the heat just from the things like popping up. And I think they did a very good job at making the audience feel that. And obviously the ending of the movie, which we can't talk that much about, but that's obviously a huge exciting kind of secret part of the movie until it gets released. But yeah, musically that was very fulfilling as well, because it's kind of like a 6 to 7 minute montage piece of music that it was very challenging to work through and shape, but in the end, very fulfilling.
So jumping into Candlelight, I actually wanted to ask you about that short as well.
Yeah.
Because again, it is a short about Maria. So I was just wondering how you tackled that, considering it is such a tough subject that people still feel a certain way about.
Yeah. And I mean, I got involved. That was pretty much like right when after it had happened, a couple of months afterwards. I found out, so I had a working relationship with Gilberto David Vasquez, who's another filmmaker. And he used to be, I think, roommates, but like he's close friends with Veronica. And I saw that he posted on Facebook that, Veronica was looking for a composer for this short film about Maria. And I didn't know Veronica at the time, but I definitely, being in LA and not being able to be there on the island, kind of like physically doing the work of rebuilding it, I was constantly looking for ways to help, whether it was like donating or like donating my services or like whatever I could do. And so I saw Candlelight as an opportunity to kind of like give back and sort of like help however that could help people in sort of like how they were feeling. But also for myself, like I saw it as a canvas to be able to express myself and kind of like let some of that hurt out, because obviously while I was not there, I mean, I was still like kind of hurting for my people and wanting to be able to figure out how to do my part. And so, yeah, I mean, Veronica, when she was like, okay, yeah, let's do it, I kind of asked Gilberto to connect me with her, and we got on board that I was going to be the composer. There wasn't that much of a musical direction when it came to it. We just knew that we wanted it to feel kind of raw and stripped down. And I come from a singer songwriter background, so like I grew up writing songs on acoustic guitars and that kind of stuff. So I felt like that was probably the most honest way that I could approach it, was just to pick up my guitar and then write kind of like a guitar based score. And yeah, it just kind of came out, once I sat down with it and started writing. Like, it was very streamlined, and it just kind of, everything just kind of fit into place pretty quickly. Yeah, and it was, it's been a beautiful experience to see it go out. We tried the festival circuits for a bit, and it wasn't until like a year after it had been done or something that this other Netflix documentary came out. And there was a lot of controversy about, like, was this really our story and whatnot? And I mean, I'm not who to judge whether, that story represented the real story or not. I don't think I got to watch it. But I know that was kind of like a motivator for the team to be like, all right, well, let's just put it out, because we were kind of like trying to find distribution for it and what was going to be the right approach for it. But at that point, it was like, all right, let's just give it to the general public. And then it kind of like blew up, because it was kind of like, oh, this is the story that really tells our story and whatnot. And it felt fulfilling to know that I had played a small part in that, and that people were having such a powerful reaction to it. So
Yeah, I found out about that short because when the documentary was on Netflix, everyone was sharing it on Twitter. And it's one of the few shorts that you can see on scene.pr, which someone made that site where you can see like Puerto Rican cinema. And that short is still there available to view. And I just remember, because the one thing I remember the most about that short is not, besides the emotions and the things that it carries, is the score. So when I saw you were connected, I was like, wait a second. So I enjoy that score. I think it's perfect. It is raw, and it perfectly encompasses the struggle and the emotions that you see visually.
Yeah. No, thank you for that.
I agree. That short was just so emotional again, because obviously, like, we were here, was something that we lived, so that we knew what it was like to, to be in that position. So not only, the beauty of the short as well, because there is a beauty of it to it, but the feelings, it brings back those emotions of, being back in that time, and it was very emotional, but so very well done. And yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think Veronica did an amazing job. And I remember specifically the part that she was very particular about, and I think was very effective, was, there were some not recreations, but she kind of documented the person that's the lead on it. And so anytime that we would cut to documenting what it was happening, there was like almost always no music on it, and it was just silence. And then when we would cut to all the news montages and stuff like that, then the music would kick in. And I remember her saying during some panels that she wanted that to be that way because during that time it was dead quiet, especially at night, because there was no power, so the only thing you would sometimes hear would be like a generator if someone in the neighborhood had a generator or things like that, but otherwise it was just quiet, and she wanted to convey that through the absence of music in those places when we would see the lead kind of like, whether it was flushing a toilet with like a jug of water or like making like beans de paquete or whatever. So like yeah, just very powerful, and it's part of what I love about filmmaking too, and score in particular, is how much more powerful music can become if given the space to breathe, um, by the absence of it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people underestimate the power that a score has on a film. Because some people might not even pay attention to it. They'll be like, yeah, there was music in it. Of course, there's music in this film. Like, why wouldn't there be music? I said, but it's so important. It's key to the film. You need to make sure that it goes well with the film. And as you mentioned in Candlelight, which I did not notice that. Now that you mention it, with that it was dead quiet with the lead, and then I really had never noticed that. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, I think that just shows you when we do our job properly, it goes unnoticed. It has the effect it's meant to have, but it doesn't stand out. And I think that's the goal right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But again, a good score, is makes or breaks a film. And again, you've done such a fantastic job in Candlelight and Romeo and Juliet. So
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, so is there a key difference between composing a piece for, a show like The Flash versus a feature-length film or a short?
um, I'd say the main difference lies in probably the time you have. Usually television works at a much faster pace, and a show like The Flash, again, I was working as part of another as the main composer's team, so I was one composer in a team of like three or so. Um, but shows like that are usually wall to wall music where the music is nonstop. So you have episodes that are 42 minutes long, and you'll likely have 38 to 40 minutes of music to get through in like 10 days, so the speed at which you need to compose tends to be a lot quicker. That's obviously different with streaming shows that are now probably being produced in its entirety before they go up. And now I think Disney and some others have adopted a format. Well, they'll release it one at a time. So I don't know if those are also being produced and released one at a time. But as it was before with like Amazon or Netflix, the whole season would just drop on the same day. So you might have a more generous amount of time to get through these things. Um, and I mean, I feel like before there was like a more noticeable difference between, TV music and film music, but I feel like nowadays, with the quality and sensibility that a lot of these TV shows have been are being made with, I think the line has gotten blurrier and blurrier. Um, because there are so many shows like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to think of some off the top of my head, but like, Handmaid's Tale, for example, like has a phenomenal score, and Watchmen also has like a mind blowing score that, when you compare, for example, if you compare the score for Watchmen versus their score for like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or Social Network, it's like, it's not all that different in terms of like the quality, the sound, their approach. So I would say, from a composing standpoint, it's always just about story. So like that approach tends to not change. What might change are the hoops you have to jump through to get it done in the amount of time that you're given and the resources that you're given. Because that's another thing too. TV shows tend to have very decent budgets, whereas with films, it's always, depending on the scope of the film, like a proper indie film, like say, Moonlight, that was like an indie film, but it's still somewhere between like $4 to $10 million, probably gives you a better budget than like a straight up ultra low budget indie film that's premiering at like South by or Sundance from an unknown filmmaker, you're probably looking at like barely a million or under a million. Then those resources obviously have to be figured out how to deliver a proper score. Whereas with TV shows, you kind of always have like, you got to have a decent show for it to be in one of those prime TV networks, so to speak. Obviously with studio films, it's a whole different story in that sense, but I feel like any tier has its set of challenges, whether it's like, because obviously with TV stuff and like studio stuff, you have more people to convince in terms of like the creatives and the executives as it starts going up, whereas with the more lower budget independent, it's just you and the director and that's it. So each one has its own set of hurdles to get through, so to say.
So you have to be fast to compose the flash. Got it.
Yeah, no, I have a well, hang on, let me see how I do this. I want to show you something I have. Hang on. So when I was working on those shows, I went to during that time, it was between 2013 and 2016. I went to an arts kind of fair in downtown LA, where you just walk from shop to shop and see things. But I came across this. I don't know if it'll come up mirrored or not, but it's a little flash thing and it says hurry up. And so I would always, and I still have this to this day on the top of my piano, even though I'm not working on the flash anymore. But I thought it was so cute because obviously, it's just kind of like him just being like, hurry up. And so I used to have that when I was working on the show. It was always on my desk. Yeah.
The ultimate motivation.
Right.
Hurry up. The flash telling you to hurry up.
But yeah, that's all for this interview. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. Yeah, absolutely wonderful responses. And it's always a pleasure speaking with you as well. Our hashtag J or Romeo and Juliet, we will let you know when it's available because it gets 2 thumbs up from the posers. So we will absolutely let you know when it's available to stream, to watch on VOD, to watch in theaters, hopefully someday. Hopefully.
Yeah. And if anybody has a South by pass, it's up until Saturday. So
excellent.
They can check it out at any time between now and Saturday.
Everyone needs to get on that now.
Please.
So we'll actually see you next time. And remember, we're all film posers. Bye.
Bye.